Hello and welcome to this overview of the PowerApps beginner course. PowerApps, who is the beginner course for and who might actually use the PowerApp tool itself? The answers overlap. Our first target audience is people who need an app development tool where you need to target smartphone and tablet users. You also want to leverage Office 365 functionality, including but not limited to SharePoint and Flows. So that's the first group who might use PowerApps and might find the beginner course useful. The second group, and this is a big group, people who are moving from SharePoint on-premise, who've been using InfoPath for their forms and perhaps SharePoint Designer as well. If you're now moving to an Office 365 environment, you will get the advantages of responsive design. You'll get the advantages of multiple possible data connections, more than you may have had in the past. And we're going to target in the beginner course specifically connecting to data in SharePoint lists. We'll also look at adding and updating data in that SharePoint list. PowerApps can also trigger a flow at a point in a process, maybe after a record's been updated. We don't do that in the beginner course, that's something for the intermediate course, but just to let you know where that fits in. We will also see that our apps can work on mobile devices. We will also find as a little extra benefit, while in the course we don't actually modify the standard SharePoint list and library forms, you will acquire during the exercises that we do the skills you need to modify the standard SharePoint list and library forms, which that's a useful thing to have up your sleeve and replaces some old functionality we got with InfoPath and SharePoint Designer. The last group who might benefit from the PowerApps beginner course and might find the tool useful are people who currently do VBA work in Excel and again are moving to Office 365. You will get a modern development environment and you will get all the same gains as the InfoPath and people looking for app development tools get as well. Because of your experience working with functions and formulas, those skills will not be wasted in your move to PowerApps as well. We're going to spend a brief moment looking at forms versus PowerApps in Office 365. In my little diagram here, you'll notice I've got a form at the bottom. And forms, you'll notice I've mentioned feature branching. They're really good for data entry and they're really good for responsive design. You can fill them in really nicely on a smartphone or a tablet or on a regular computer. Our forms data, when somebody submits a form, goes back into Office 365. We can then export that out to Excel. We can also have the completion of a new form trigger a flow. And the flow's job is to write that data from the form into a SharePoint list. Now that's very useful, cuts down a lot of double handling, but you'll notice from my diagram it's a one-way trip. We go from forms to perhaps an Excel spreadsheet or to a flow that updates a SharePoint list. But if we've submitted data, there's no mechanism in forms for searching and retrieving that data unless you want to go to the SharePoint list. So, forms very useful, but it's a one-way trip. What we can do, however, is we can, with PowerApps, we can have a data entry form, people complete the form includes date pickers and drop-downs. Basically, that data is then sent to a SharePoint list or some other data source for storage, but in the beginner course we'll use a SharePoint list. We can then search for that data and display matching records and the search can be based on a number of different criteria, which we'll have a look at searching across a number of fields. We'll take a search term, search across a number of fields, matching records are then returned. Then we could then edit those matching records or one of those matching records. And so what we have is a two-way process. We're able to record data from a Power App into a SharePoint list or some other data source, and then through our Power App we can then search, we can retrieve data and then perhaps update it. The other thing that we can do that parallels forms but goes a bit further is we can either have a flow triggered when the list is updated, so we can have a flow triggered at that end as a result of the actions of the Power App, or from within Power App's development environment itself, we can actually connect to a flow and have a series of actions happen at some key point, which might be, for example, sending something to a manager for approval. Forms, useful and very, very useful, but it's a one-way trip. Power Apps allows us not only to update, Power Apps allows us not only to add data, but to retrieve it, search for it, update it. In the Power Apps beginner course, what do we actually do? Well, in the morning session, we build an app automatically using a SharePoint list as the data source. This then creates a 3-screen app for us. We then go through, we explore that, we adjust the layout and formatting, so we use what is effectively conditional formatting to color code some values. We have a look at improving the search so that the search will search on multiple fields. We also explore different settings, which leads us to publishing our app and sharing it with our colleagues. The PM session of the course, we build an app from a blank canvas. We actually start from scratch. We use a number of data sources, so again a SharePoint list, a photo library, an image library in SharePoint, and we also use an Excel spreadsheet. We set up an application where you can search for records. Matching records are then displayed based on multiple criteria that we set up. We also then choose an item, and then the customer makes an offer on the item. The Power App will work out the margin, and then we have a simple email that's then sent perhaps to the finance manager for their approval. Where this would lead is in the intermediate course, you would then have a flow triggered by this that might do an approval flow. For example, does the manager approve the offer that's been made? But at this stage, in the beginner course, we'll get an email being sent. Still a useful point to reach. Let's have a look now at what we actually create on the day. This is an example of the list that we'll be working with in SharePoint. It's basically a list imported from Excel with different types of columns, so representative of many SharePoint lists. So we start with this list, and then what do we actually create? Let's have a little bit of a look. We create a basic 3-screen app. This is actually the end result, or closer to the end result, that you'll actually build in the morning session of the Power Apps beginner course. So it doesn't come with the color coding for values, it doesn't come as 2 columns. We learn how to add that in and rearrange the information that's displayed to more closely meet your requirements. It does automatically come with an assortment of controls we can use to refresh and sort and add new records. We do add a new record and see how that updates our list back in SharePoint. We also have a look at tweaking the search. So when I go to search, the default search is a filter. It's just working with one particular column or field. It's not as effective. So you'll notice in here, as I type in the beginnings of a make, it's actually filtering the data to show us that make. And because we've got it working on multiple columns, if I type in part of a name, we can actually see it's filtering based on that name. We improve the search. This is all based on a SharePoint list, and we tweak it and fine-tune it to suit. Let's have a little bit of a look at what's behind the scenes. If I close the preview here, we're now in the Power App Studio, and we spend a fair bit of time in here where we're looking at the different screens and we explore the different aspects. One of the things we do is have a look at working with the various properties, both in a static sense through the properties pane, but also up here through the formula bar. And This is an example. This is actually the improved version of the search that we create. And you will learn how to do that if you come on the PowerApps beginner course. So that's the morning session, is exploring and finding our way around the PowerApps Studio. We then, in the afternoon session, we create an app, this time in a tablet profile. You saw the earlier one was a smartphone profile. We start this from scratch. We again use a SharePoint list and a photo library and an Excel spreadsheet as well to contribute different data. We build basically the entire application. We're starting from a blank screen. Basically then we add some filters here. So you'll see we've got some sliders, and we can see our search results changing as we work with the sliders. We can also filter by a range of different makes. So I want to see Holdens, and I might want to see DeLoreans because, hey, who wouldn't want a DeLorean? And so we see our various search results here. At this point, we're seeing vehicles that meet our price range criteria. And what we also have a look at doing is where we select a particular vehicle, and you'll notice we can get the selected item or product to change colour. We then go to the sell screen, and when I go to the sell screen, I see all of the details for that particular product, and it's actually using a common field, pulled out all the matching photos from our photo library in SharePoint. We see that we've got a target price here and a wholesale cost. So I have a buyer, and my buyer is offering a particular value, and they might be offering, look, 6,300 is their offer. It then calculates the margin for us. Given that, I might submit that sale, which then updates the database, actually excludes reserved and sold vehicles are excluded from the search results. It's then generated an email for us here, which we could then address this email, send it on, and you'll notice it's pre-completed using data that has come from the application, and in the case of my name here at the bottom, it knows from the environment who I am. And you'll notice up the right, we've even got a little paper plane, the traditional icon to send that inquiry off. So we get that application working. So it's at this point we have displayed records, we've set up search criteria, we have actually got the database, or the list in this case, being updated to indicate this vehicle's now reserved so that it's excluded from future searches, and we have an email that would be sent to a nominated person with some initial details. So at this point, we've effectively built a complete app. So that leaves us with a complete working application. At Nexacu, we'd like to help you learn more about this topic. To find our full range of courses, look at nexacu.com.au or contact our team via info@nexacu.com.au. To learn about other content as we release it, please do the YouTube two-step, which is click subscribe, then the alert button, or follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook. Thank you for your time.